Welcome to The Edge. I'm joined by Dan Umfleet of Kindbridge Behavioral Health. Kindbridge won the 2025 American Gambling Awards Responsible Gaming Award for this year. Congratulations on that, Dan. If you would, and thank you for joining us, if you would, talk to us about what Kindbridge is, some of the successes that you've seen recently, and where you guys are headed.
Why, thank you very much for having me, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks very much for the hearty congratulations. It was an award that we are very happy to have received, that's for sure. So Kindbridge has been a journey, right? We sort of birthed this idea off of some of the lessons learned over in Europe back in like 2017 to 2020 on some of the things that were going on across the pond and some of the things that we saw developing here in the States. We saw a real lack of treatment infrastructure in the U.S. for individuals who are suffering from gambling-related harms and needed access to the right kind of resources and the right kind of care plans. And so we took it upon ourselves to start building a network of clinicians who are licensed and certified to treat individuals with gambling problems, and very slowly started building out a platform and building out an approach with operators that made sense, and started bundling together a suite of services that fit very nicely on the back end of online operators platforms, in some case, some bricks and mortar casino platforms, where it allows the individual to have access to a suite of resources, including educational resources, peer support, direct scheduling capabilities with counselors, all in one place, so that we took some of the confusion on how to navigate the system if you are looking for help out of the equation. The last couple of years have been very interesting. We're a digital health first company. We work on a handful of populations across the country, gamblers being one of them. We also work with video gamers, and we work with the individuals that are stuck in social media loops and have an addiction to social media platforms and things of that nature. But we also are a behavioral health, mental health clinical group at the heart of it. So we do work with state troopers, emergency medical responders, large health systems, state integrations, right? And so we really kind of took a concept of, we know that individuals need access to the right kind of resources in this population. We know that operators want to lean in and do more in this space to create better protections for individuals. And we've had some pretty solid success with it so far. Come recently, we've started moving into a handful of additional states and building out additional state infrastructure for these issues. And I think that's going to continue to go. We've started integrating with more casino operators in a broad spectrum, including some up in Canada. So the business is growing and the business is going in the right direction. And we keep bringing on more care providers, and we keep training more staff, and we keep chugging along. It's a great place to be right now.
Well, clearly you guys are doing a fantastic job, and again, congratulations on the Responsible Gaming Award. That says a lot about the work you guys are doing. As the industry has evolved, your industry's responsible gaming related efforts in helping people who do have compulsive gaming problems and issues, there are people, candidly, I'm one of the ones who's just a recreational casual person. I'll bet $5 once every several months on what looks like a lopsided win, just to win 50 cents and just to sort of make the game watching fun. But then you do have those who are get into a hole. I know I saw a presentation you gave, I think at Ohio State, where you talked about the example of somebody who gets into a hole, continues to think, hey, I can bet on sports and win a lot of money, and gets a deeper hole. How do you, in the years that you guys have been open, How have you seen the industry progress in taking someone from the compulsive problem end to, an occasional recreational person, if even that, or just kicking it altogether? How has that evolved over the last several years?
I think the interesting way to think about this and look at this through the lens is because of the integrations on the operator platforms, we've been able to catch individuals much earlier, right? So some of the trends that we see now that we're embedded and we're collecting information on what's going on with the individual when they arrive, we see a lot of individuals that have high levels of stress, not necessarily addiction or compulsive disorders, but high levels of stress and a massive lack of understanding of how to organize things in their life in a specific way that create a healthy balance, if that makes sense, right?
It does.
We see a lot
It
of
does.
patterns of individuals who, like, hey, they didn't get a raise this year. They're dealing with some internal financial complications from maybe over utilizing credit, or maybe their mortgage rate went up in an adjustable rate mortgage, something along those lines, right? And they're trying to make ends meet, and they're trying to close a gap, right? And their stress that's coming from what they're experiencing going on in their personal lives, and then there's stress that can permeate from what happens when they start getting involved in sports betting, right? Or iGaming, or whatever the fever or the flavor is, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And so we take a lot of time and effort to help the individual understand what balance looks like and help them get back into healthy habits. I think one of the massive disservices to a majority of individuals, and especially our youth in this country right now, are a serious lack of understanding how to navigate the financial world with all of the introduction of new financial products, new financial markets, new financial vehicles, and the confusion when you see a bunch of your mates or your friends celebrating every win when you're going out to the pub or the bar, and you feel like you should get involved in this, and this is going to be a great thing. And then all of a sudden, it's not such a great thing, right? And so helping individuals understand what a balance and a healthy relationship looks like in that situation does a lot of good prevention work early and avoids problems later on. So you're really working on behaviors with the person early and often. For the individuals who are showing up in a much more acute or higher level of problematic play position, right? Those individuals need a significant amount of more work. Oftentimes, abstinence is the best path forward for that individual. So we will work in a more higher acute setting with those individuals to get them into recovery and get them back to feeling better. But oftentimes for those individuals, gambling is not an option moving forward. There's a variety of comorbidities or co-occurring addictions that are often present with those individuals. And so there's a fair amount of work that we do with those individuals to help get them back to feeling like a successful, productive human being.
That's a good point. And you talk about just the whole online world, period, whether it's shopping or whatever else. I think people sometimes get into that world, and there's a little bit of a rabbit hole. Can you bring people from someone who has I know this is broad spectrum, but who has a compulsive problem to the point where there's some financial difficulties, marriage difficulty, whatever, to just sort of a recreational person, which I think the vast majority of gamblers, sports bettors are probably just recreational, but not to take away clearly from those who have serious, economic
Understood.
issues.
Yeah.
Is there a way
Understood.
to get somebody to just, hey, it's just an occasional recreational thing? Or there, as you said a moment ago, some people, it's probably best just to move them away from it.
Yeah, it is so person dependent, and it is so case dependent on what else is happening with that individual in their life, right? There are some instances where there are, a primary disease and a secondary disease, right? And then we have these wonderful things called Z codes, which in our world, that's like a social determinant of health, right? So it's helping us understand what's going on in the person's environment that is influencing disease that's recorded in a primary or secondary diagnosis. In some instances, that primary or secondary diagnosis is something like bipolar disorder. And in a situation with an individual with bipolar disorder, but this is just a personal recommendation. I'm not, this is not me going to peer-reviewed research or anything of that nature, right? But the reality of the situation is for someone who's dealing with manic episodes, up, down, high levels of swings, pendulum going back and forth, it is not a good idea for that individual to partake in things that exacerbate those conditions once those conditions start to kick in, if that makes sense, right? So much of it is a personal journey when you're going through recovery, right? So much of it is personal commitment to what your future looks like. So for most individuals who are, let's call it deep down the rabbit hole, it's thinking through recalibrating almost every facet of their life and how they operate and how they manage and balance a whole lot of different factors that are contributing to ill mental health. So for some individuals, it is definitely 100% a cautionary tale of stay away and don't continue. For other individuals, it's their own personal journey and it's their own personal choice what they do when they're in recovery. So it is so dependent on the individual. There's no recipe. There's no silver bullet to having a successful individual come back from the brink in some sort of prescribed way, right? Everything is so down to the individual and how you're working with your counselor or your healthcare professionals, how you're dealing with med management, how you're dealing with psychiatry, these types of things. There's not one method it's not a one size fit all.
I think that's I'm really glad you said that, and I think it's great that the regulated gaming industry has these services available. Gaming period, not just the regulated industry. I know we've had some instances where you look at these $1 million athletes who get into a hole with some problem gambling or whatever, and then you got some potential for rigged games. I think we saw some things crop up recently, but aside from that, that you guys are out there providing this service is massive. And if someone, as we wrap up, if you would please, and we'll put this online, how to reach out to you guys. I know there are people who are thinking, shoot, I want to reach out. I don't know what to do. And I don't know, am I somebody that can be a moderate gambler, or what step am I at? And I think there will be people who want to know that and to reach out to you guys. And I think that's very helpful what you just said. There are all kinds of approaches based on the individual. I think some people watching this might not think that sort of approach is available. If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And that is the lion's share of the work that we do with our casino industry relationships, right? It is a lot of helping an individual go through an assessment process and get a much deeper understanding of what's going on with them from a holistic perspective, right? So, there's lots of self-assessment tools that are, binary, answer the question, yes, no, slide the number up on a scale. They'll give you an indicator, right? But one of the things that I think that is very beneficial to individuals that reach us through the operator platforms that we're integrated into is that person can go through a holistic battery of exams, which gives them a deep understanding of what's going on with them and all of the influencing factors that are contributing to whatever the negative experiences that they're having. And what we do then is we help that individual understand what the path forward looks like based off of what we're seeing through the diagnosis process, right? And so that gives that person a lot of clarity. It gives that person a lot of information on what to do next and how to get started and what to work on first, what to work on in parallel, right? And ultimately help that person start the journey of digging into managing their own mental health at a much more consistent and sustainable scale and a much more reliable approach, if that makes sense.
It does. And as we look at that, and it really does come down to the individual reaching out, it sounds like, and just listen, there are a lot of approaches. Go ahead and reach out. Excuse me. That being the case, what is that? So when you look at some of the challenges going forward for the industry and for you guys service, you guys part of the industry, what are some of the challenges looking ahead in helping really uh, uh, contain and corral the responsible gaming effort?
Deeper integrations, right? And like what I mean by that, there's a lot of risk scoring platforms that are being introduced into online casino play. It's being introduced into bricks and mortar too, albeit a little bit more slowly. But there are programs that are running in the background that are helping monitor triggers or monitor markers, monitor markers of harm on the individual that are quantifying the individual's play patterns and the play behavior in the background that are giving us signals, right? Like it's early days with the integration of these types of risk scoring. And I think we still are sort of standing on the edge of understanding what we can do when we have a deeper understanding on platform of what's going on with the individual. But I think communications through those channels, once something is identified and, something is suspected, so to speak, right? Crafting messaging that is non-judgmental, that is not stigmatic, that is not accusatory, to spark a conversation with the person and get the person thinking about what their relationship with gambling really looks like. And then helping that individual through those channels navigate more tightly integrated pathways into whatever the resources are that they need, whether that's activating the RG tools on platform, whether that's getting some educational material around general mental health and common issues that gamblers deal with, whether that's talking to someone who's been there before in a peer support setting, or whether that's directly going into counseling if counseling feels like an appropriate next step for you, right? So I think there's more opportunity for deeper connectivity. I think it's a challenge because, we haven't made that nexus yet. We haven't made that connection yet. And I think we're working on it. And I think we'll see some very interesting results coming from it. But I think that's a challenge. I think, other challenges are political challenges. Other challenges are other regulatory bodies with other products that look and feel very much like financial products that are very much starting to implement gambling mechanisms inside of them, trying to navigate what that looks like and how that works in this environment. It's constantly changing, which is, I think, the unique thing about the US is that there's always an appetite for innovation. There's always an appetite for efficiency. There's always an appetite for consumer protections. And I think, this moves at such a fast speed, and every quarter you wake up, there's a whole lot of new things that are going on out there that you have to try to navigate. So I think the one thing that we've always tried to do is stay consistent and get the message out that anyone who, comes through this pathway or works with us is coming into a sustainable environment and wants to dig in and do the work and roll its sleeves up and help. Right. And I think that that's boded well for us.
That really comes through very, very, very soundly. And I appreciate you getting at that, Dan, because make the call. There's no shame in it. There's no embarrassment. There's no, you're not, there's no finger pointing. It's a process to help you address what's going on in your life. There's no shame in that. Is that sort of, am I oversimplifying it? In other words, reach out. We're here to help. Is that sort of the
100%.
Oversimplified message?
100%. I think that's direct to the point, right? If you've even got a question in your mind, right? Or if you've got a question about a loved one in your mind or someone in your life in your mind that you are curious, right? Reach out, have the conversation, right? It's easy enough to get started. end of story, right? Like it's easy enough to get some answers and start getting in a game plan together and moving in a direction in a very helpful manner for either yourself or that person.
Thank you so much. And let me back up a little bit. Excuse me. Let me back up just a little bit. And you don't have to give names. I know when you spoke up again, I saw online one of your presentations, there was an NBA player, I think you, at that event, or was an example using of, that was used about, some of the issues he had. Would you mind conveying, because there will be an individual sitting out there thinking, hey, there's nothing wrong, quote, wrong with me. This hits, big time athletes and everything else. Can you point to an example, Dan, of sort of how somebody who did overcome a big concern?
Sure. Like there's a lot of them. You're talking about Randy Livingston, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Randy is very public about what his recovery journey looked like. He's very comfortable talking about what the journey entailed and how long it took, and what his aha moment was and when he knew that he needed to get help and things like this. He's a great one. And there's, FanDuel has created a program with him called Trusted Voices, and Trusted Voices is a good resource to go have a look at and get some deeper information on Randy's story and Randy's journey. But there's a lot of them. Like we have worked over the years with former NFL players. We have worked with Major League Soccer players. We have worked with pretty much anything that you can name of, from, a league setting and a professional setting down to a collegiate setting, and even in some cases, high school settings. Athletes have a very specific mindset. They're very competitive in nature. They want to win. They practice. They basically eat, drink, sleep, live their sport every single day so that they can continue to get better. And when influencing factors sort of work their way into the everyday thought process of the individual, gambling is oftentimes perceived as something that they can practice at and continue to get better. Oftentimes there's a lot of generational trauma that's being carried around. There's influence on their gambling activity from their family from way back in the day, from when they were young. And, ultimately, some of them can get themselves into some deeper trouble. And we're always happy to be a helping hand when something like that happens.
Hey, if you're, and this just came to mind because I put a lot of value in this conversation we're having because I'm learning a lot. Is there somebody who's, you got your phone, you're heading down to the sports book down the street or whatever. Is there some kind of, and I know it's I'm sure it's different from person to person, but is there something that can trigger somebody to think, what, I might have a problem? I mean, and it doesn't, you don't have to be $2 million like a professional athlete might be who has that sort of money in the hole. You may be $500 in the hole. You may be $1,000 in the hole. Whatever it is there something that somebody needs to say to himself, Dan, where you can say, what, I probably should reach out? Is there a trigger? Is it a financial trigger? Is it I can't get away from the betting trigger? What would make somebody watching this think, what, I'm going to go ahead and make a call?
There's a couple of examples that I give. One is if you're disappearing to the bathroom and spending, 45 minutes in the bathroom while your family's out there for movie night type thing, and you're all you're doing is playing around on your phone, that's problematic, right? Like that's a big one. If you find yourself hiding a lot of your financial transactions and not talking to your spouse in the event that you're married about what's going on with your finances, specifically because you don't want to share what's going on with your finances, that's another thing that can cause you to pause, right? Bank alerts, they come through that your credit card payment's overdue, or that you just hit your overdraft, or you don't have an overdraft and the bank is messaging you saying a transaction's declined, these types of things. I think all these things are just, pause for cause, right? They're obviously not telltale signs for everybody. I mean, everybody's situation is different and everybody can get in a pinch. And I think as a society, we're at a very interesting point in time where we have a lot of Americans that are in a pinch, right? So that's not necessarily 100% a telltale sign. But if those things are coming up because you're gambling too often and you're not even thinking about how often you're gambling, you might want to stop for a second and think about what gambling is doing to your finances in those particular moments in time. And if that's the case, there are lots of resources out there that can help in those events, right? There's everything from financial recovery services to financial counseling, straight through to if you want to deal with the heart of the issue, you can come in and talk to psychiatry, you can come in and talk to counselors. There is a wide variety of ways to address this depending on the lens that you're looking at it through. So the best thing to do is if you're in any of those scenarios that were just described, just stop and think. That's all you got to do. Just stop and think, right? A lot of times the individual who has an issue will only reach out after there is some sort of catastrophic event, right? For married individuals, a lot of times what you see is the wife has threatened to leave and the husband doesn't want to lose the wife, right? So they're triggered to take action to avoid another fallout in their life, right? It's common that, trauma can trigger wanting to basically crawl into something so that it consumes you and you don't have to think about what it is that really is top of mind that you're not dealing with, right? So scenarios like that are very important to pay attention to. I think, another thing, especially, honestly, this applies to pretty much everybody. Everybody goes through large transitions in their life, whether it's a loved one passing away, whether it's a retirement and you're stepping out of the sport that you've been playing for the last 15 to 20 years, whether it's a military person being shipped to another part of the world that they weren't expecting, whether they're retiring and stepping back into civilian life. Those transitions are very complicated for people to wrap their head around in the best of times. And for people to keep their mind sharp in those periods of times can be harder, right? Because you're going through such a titanic shift in what's going on in your life. And so keep an eye out for those transition periods, because those transition periods require extra management and extra mindfulness, right? And in a lot of cases, what you do see is individuals who are going through a massive transition and the transition did not go so hot.
And as you said, as a family member, sometimes you may not be able to recognize those telltale signs yourself, possibly. As a family member who sees it, go ahead and reach out also, right? Is that also
100%.
part of the message?
Yeah, 100%. They call this sort of like the hidden addiction, right? And it's because it doesn't show up on your face. It doesn't show up on your body, right? It's not like being addicted to substance or, some other terribly horrible recreational drug type thing, right? This is one of those things that people tend to carry around a lot silently, and they tend to craft realities that are built on a foundation of lies in order to try to convince everyone around them that nothing's wrong, right? But spouses can often pick up on subtle changes. It's changes in behavior, like a lot of, hey, they're disappearing a lot. That's different, right? Like they're up a lot at night. That's different, right? They're locking themselves away in rooms on specific days of the week where their specific sport is playing and you hear a lot of yelling. Maybe that's different, right? So there are things that you can pick up on as the impacted other. You see a lot of shifts in attitude on specific things. You see a lot of shifts in demeanor right? And you have more highs and more lows, and the lows become a little bit more obvious, right? Because maybe you're getting a little bit grouchy. You're getting a little bit grouchy with the kids, this type of thing, and that's not normal, right? So I would always encourage anyone who's in any sort of relationship, period, have open and honest conversations when you see shifts in demeanor and you see shifts in communication patterns. And, just make sure that everything that's going on is manageable and healthy, and try to get out in front of it as fast as you possibly can, and don't let it linger, and don't sit there silently. Because then you start to suffer too as the impacted other. Right. And I think impacted others are also, they need attention and they need guidance as well. Because if something goes on for too long, then you've got two people in a relationship that are in a sticky situation, right? So yeah, the best thing to do when it comes to mental health in general is just be mindful of what's going on with your brain, with your partner's brain, with your kids' brains, with your parents' brains, whoever it may be, right? And make sure that you're having good, healthy conversations often. And I think oftentimes, a lot of us will ask one another how you're doing. It's almost like a greeting, like saying hello, right? And the standard response is, "Oh, I'm good, all good, cool, everything's okay," right? But there are ways to imply the meaning behind those words when you ask them that will entice the individual to dig a little deeper, right? So be a little bit more genuine with that greeting, and let individuals open up a little bit more and talk a little bit more about what's going on, and actively listen and participate in the conversation, and let them know that there's not alone, and that they have people that they can rely on, that they can talk to. Too many of us don't feel like we have people that we can talk to, right? Especially
Yeah.
men. A lot of our circle is very closed, it's very small, and there's a lot of issues that we don't like talking about with other people, right? So encouraging more conversation around any topic that gets the individual talking about what's going on in their life is very meaningful to folks who are struggling with something. So I would always encourage, go deeper when you're asking the question of how are you, right? Don't just use it as a topical hi, hello. Put some meaning behind it.
Great point. I know there's a UFC fighter who says, especially with men, don't be afraid. Everybody, but men have had some kind of, it's not macho, it's not whatever, but no, reach out for
Yeah.
help in any mental health regard. Dan, before we wrap, and I want to, if you would, before we close down our conversation, which has been fascinating. Thank you for this. A way for where people should go to get in touch with you guys. But before we do that, the view from 30,000 feet, when you look at the responsible gaming effort, where do you see it headed in the future? Is it more sort of destigmatizing, reaching out? Is it more towards broadening? Like you say, there's some political approaches. And then where do you see you guys, your company, going after this recognition and going forward?
That's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes.
That's good.
Somewhat tied
It's a
together.
lot of questions in one, right? I mean, I see the
Future,
RG
where's it
space.
headed?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, basically, the future. Where's it headed? Where's the industry headed, and you guys?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I think, I mean, what you're kind of starting to see, it's pretty similar to other jurisdictions across the globe. Where markets open up, and everybody's rushing to get market share and get legal framework around introduction of new products into a community/society, right? And then as things go along, you start to learn a little bit more, and you start to focus on things that are a little bit more consumer centric in terms of protections, right? And I think we're going to see the continuation of that. I think there's I think what you're starting to see, like in the ramp up for the next legislative session, is some, hey, we need to go back and take a tighter look at the way that we set things up in the first place, and maybe reconsider what it is that we're building for the future, right? Because I think it's very different. Like the U.S. was coming sort of out of, hey, it's in the legal framework, it's basically bricks and mortar. Right. And then you introduce the online wave, right? And I think online and bricks and mortar are very different animals. And I think also, your Generation Z and the upcoming Generation Alphas, right? Like they participate and contribute in the world a lot different than the Gen Xers and the boomers and the millennials, right? And so thinking through the way that they interact with product, thinking through the way that they think about consumer protections, thinking through the way that they think about mental health, your customer is going to require that you take mental health a lot more seriously than the previous generations had thought about it. It's just what we're seeing show up in the workforce, everything from the benefits that they want to the proactive approach that they take to reaching out and managing their mental health. Like, we have to think about how to build and curate an environment for the next generation of individuals that are going to be utilizing these platforms. And we need to get out in front of it as quick as we possibly can because they're already here, right? And I think generation after generation after generation, what we're going to keep seeing is more destigmatizing language, more strategic approaches to enhancing how the community thinks about reaching out for mental health. We're going to see more integrations of AI into healthcare, more integrations of AI into frontline services that can act as navigation tools for individuals. And I think we have to wrap our head around how to use these things. And I think for us, like, we're happy to be at the center of a lot of the thinking that goes on here. I think one very interesting thing that has sort of developed over the last, let's call it 12 to 18 months is I do a lot more sort of strategic thinking and a lot more guidance on how to build better environments and ecosystems in this space. And I'm talking with a lot more leaders, and I'm talking with a lot more global leaders about how to do it. I think a lot of that will continue to go in that direction. And I think for us, one of the biggest missions for us is getting the healthcare side of the house to pay really close attention to what goes on with digital dependencies, right? And like, digital dependencies can be everything from, online gaming, online gambling, pornography, social media, online shopping, anything that is taking a really large amount of your brain capital, and it is asking you to engage with it heavily and frequently, can oftentimes disrupt the balance that you've got in your physical life. And it impacts a variety of disease that may already be present with the individual or issues that the individual is dealing with. And there are ways to integrate into healthcare as a vertical talking about this subject that will be massively beneficial to the wider communities because it's implemented as a service line, right? And it's destigmatized and not buried when you start talking about carrying it as a service line across health systems. And I think that's incredibly important, right? It's incredibly important for insurers to know that this is an issue and to start picking up and covering these issues in areas where they don't, right? I think this is incredibly important as we talk about what's going on with Medicare and Medicaid across the country to get more visibility on some of the issues that the next generation of person is dealing with at a higher rate. I think it's very important that we start talking to managed care organizations about how to carry service lines that deal with these issues, how you create plug and play situations, right? So like, we have always sort of focused on being a picks and shovels service, right? And so at the root of it, what we want is really good care for the individual. We just want to keep getting more and more clever at how to create more pathways for that care and more relationships with bigger, broader systems that have a much bigger reach and can really take away a lot of the stigma around these things much faster, right? So grassroots is impactful, it's important, right? But what we're looking for is big system understanding so that something like this gets to a wider audience on a bigger platform much faster. But it's done so in a very destigmatizing way, right? Like, the last thing that we want to do is get visibility on services that are focused on these issues in a way that is driving people away because they're concerned that they're being accused about having an addiction that they don't know that they have, or they haven't come to terms with, or they don't have, whatever the scenario may be, right? Using very common language and helping people understand a lot of what happens in the digital dependency space is a very fine line to walk. It's a very, very fine balance to strike, right? But we're looking for better education, better information, easier access, and deeper integration across multiple verticals. And I like that's the direction to travel for us.
Thanks so much, Dan. Dan Umfleet, Kindbridge Behavioral Health. Thanks so much for this valuable insight, and congratulations on the Responsible Gaming Award from the American Gambling Awards from Gambling.com. Thanks so much, Dan. Before we sign off, how can someone reach out to you guys? Where do you go to get the services you guys provide?
Easiest way is Kindbridge.com. Right. I think that's the most simple way to get to us is Kindbridge.com. There's a direct scheduling tool right on the website. There's an AI chatbot right on the website that'll start answering questions if you've got questions and you're not ready to talk to someone. If you are ready to talk to someone, our phone number is 877-426-4258. We've got people answering the phone 24/7. So don't ever think that it's, 2:00 in the morning and you can't reach out. You can reach out anytime you want. We're doing 24/7 scheduling. We're always here to help.
Thanks so much, Dan Umfleet. I really do appreciate it. I'm Larry Henry at Gambling.com. Thank you for joining us on The Edge.